everyone, it's Kristie here from KP Creatives with another video for Two Scrapbook Friends. And if you haven't guessed it, we are going to be talking about embossing powders today. I have recently gotten a couple of the Wow embossing powders, which are new to me, and I need to swatch them and add them to my swatch book. So I thought I would take you through the process of how I do that. So you're going to need whatever embossing powders you have in your stash. You'll need your heat tool. Any heat tool you have will do. I'm going to get into this book in a moment, so I'm going to set this off to the side right now. You'll need some embossing ink. I have been using this Wow ink for the past several months, and I think it is one of the best. You can use Versamark, you can use any company's embossing ink or watermark ink that will work. I just have found with the Wow one, I'm getting really great results, and they are very consistent, which I really appreciate when I'm doing embossing, because sometimes if that ink isn't super juicy, then you don't have the best results. So I've had really great results with this Wow embossing pad. You're going to need some other tools just to make sure your swatches turn out the way that you want them. So always nice to have a clean, dry brush when you're doing embossing, just to wipe away any of the powder that gets in areas that you don't want it. You'll want to have your anti-static powder tool on hand. I have this one. I think this is from Inkadinkado, but I put it like a chip clip on it because I saw this on Bromero Cards on one of his videos, and it really is nice not to have to get your fingers in the powder. You just have that clip on to make sure you're wiping off the paper that you want to emboss so that you don't get powder anywhere you don't want it to be. You'll need some scissors. I like to have either a clothes peg or use my tweezers to hold the paper away from me when I'm embossing so my fingers don't get too hot. If you haven't discovered the Sharpie Click Pen from Two Scrapbook Friends, if you are a stationery lover, this is a must-have in your collection. It is a great pen. It writes really smooth, doesn't get globbed up, and I love it. So grab a couple of these and they will help just with the writing on our swatches. And then we're going to use some Gina K tape runner and some score tape. So you can see here on all of the embossing powders that I have, I'll pop this red geranium one up from Ranger. So I keep them just in a box. This is actually a box that was the top of a photo box that I've had for years, and I think the box was ripped, so I just used the top to hold my powders and it works perfectly. So I do a swatch on the top. Now I use a hexagon punch for this. You could use a hexagon die. You could use any shape of die. You could do stars, squares, circles, triangles, whatever floats your boat. So if you've got a punch hanging around, or you've got a nesting die set with a small shape, use that and it will work excellent. And I just adhere it to the top of whatever the container is with some of that really strong score tape. And that works really well for me. So you can see here, I've got my collection of embossing powders. I have them swatched out on the top so I can see what they look like. And there's two that need to be finished. And these are two new ones that I've recently acquired from Wow through Two Scrapbook Friends. So I'm just gonna put those off to the side and keep the anti-static powder tool handy. Now, I also recently picked up one of these great 4x4 books from Two Scrapbook Friends, and I thought this would be really fun to use the 2x2 sheets of paper to swatch out my embossing powders and some new inks that I have that I haven't swatched out yet. That'll be for an upcoming video. Those are some of the new inks from, or new to me inks from Pink Fresh. So this first page obviously isn't the most exciting embossing swatch page because it's clear and white. But if you get close and without the glare, and I apologize for that on the plastic sheets here, but you can really see if the embossing powder that you're going to be using is going to work with your project. So if we flip on to the next page, this is where you really get to see the benefit of swatching, because you know exactly what your embossing powder is going to look like on your project. So these two pages, I think most of these are from Ranger. This one's from Lawn Fawn, and I've just swatched them out very basic. I just wipe the embossing ink pad right direct to paper and then emboss over top. And then we have some of the metallics, so gold, silver, from Lawn Fawn and Ranger, black and black sparkle. This black sparkle is one of my favorites from Ranger. It's excellent. And then we're going to fill in these other 2 squares from the Wow line. I've already swatched out Peppermint Scrub and Karen's Dream. And this Karen's Dream I think is really cool if you want to be embossing anything that's beachy, like sand. You know, I think that would look really cool over like an alcohol ink background with blues or pool colors. I think that could be really neat. And the Peppermint Scrub, super for word die cuts, anything related to the holidays, just gives it that extra punch. So so that's how I like to swatch out my embossing powders. It is handy to have them all in one place. And like I said, I will be adding Pink Fresh Studio ink swatches to this book so that I have them all in one place and I can take them with me eventually one day when we get to go to crops again. You will find this close to me in my work area along with the swatch book I have for my Distress Oxides. So let's get rolling here. I'm just going to show you the process that I go through to swatch out the embossing powders. So I've got 2 of the hexagons already punched out. Again, the punch that I have, I've had for probably 15 years. But you can use any shape of any die cut that you like. You know, use if you want to use stars, like I mentioned, circles, squares, whatever you like. So I use a lot of scrap paper when I'm making my swatches. And sorry, I'm just going to get these out of the way one more time. So to start, I have a base layer of just computer printer paper. Just fold it in half and use that on top of your work surface because you don't want to be cleaning up embossing powder over absolutely everything in your craft room. So I find having just a piece of copy paper works great. Then I'm going to use a few pieces of scrap white cardstock for just to help me handle this as we go through the process. I've already cut pieces of the Nina Solar White Classic Crest into 2x2 squares. That is the paper that I emboss on most often. When you're swatching your materials, I would encourage you to swatch on the material that you use the most. That's going to get you the most consistent results when you are swatching out your materials. So I like to use this Gina K tape runner because I can reposition it. So I just do a couple of swipes onto this scrap piece of paper. And I'm going to adhere the hexagon, and it doesn't matter where, it doesn't have to be exact. We're just putting it on this piece of scrap paper so that we have a little bit more room to handle once we get the embossing ink on and once we start to use the embossing powders themselves. All right, so now we're going to get that embossing ink. Again, you could use Versamark for this. You could use any company's watermark or embossing ink. And we are going to go direct to paper. So I know it might be a little difficult to see because there's a lot of white here, but I'm going in right direct to that 2x2 square. I'm pressing and I'm dragging my embossing ink pad down to the bottom, and I'm going to do it twice. And then I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to do it right over top of the hexagon. Now that embossing ink is getting on either side of the hexagon. I'm not worried about it. Embossing powders last a long time. You really get good value for your money when you're getting those powders. So I know some of the powder will stick on those areas, but that's okay. I'm not too worried about it. So the first one we're going to swatch here is called Amalfi, and you can see through the bottom here that this is beautiful jewel tones, and I cannot wait to see what this looks like. So let's get this down, just pouring it over top of the areas that we've got that nice juicy sticky ink, and lift up, and I'm going to tap off onto this extra piece of scrap paper. And there we go. So we can see we've got great coverage, and that looks really good. So I'm just going to set this off to the side. I'm going to fold up this half piece. This is just, again, regular computer paper. Pop this back into the container. And really, when you put in the excess back into your container time after time with embossing, they really do last a long time. So it really is great value, and you can use them on all sorts of cool things and cool projects. So now we have our piece here. I'm going to get my heat gun nice and hot, but just before I do that, I'm going to take my dry paintbrush and just scoot along the edge here. There's some powder that was just on the white part of the swatch that I didn't want it to be. And it's probably there because you may have noticed I forgot to use my anti-static powder tool. So I will be sure to do that for the next swatch. So I'm gonna get my clothes peg in here. Excuse the noise for the heat tool. I'm gonna get my heat tool nice and hot and just keep moving it around over top of these two pieces, the hexagon and the square here, until they get nice and melted. So here we go. So one of the cool things about these wow powders is because they have so many different colors in them, you really get a nice, unique look each time you use them, which is pretty cool. And you can see, like in some areas where there's more of the lighter colors, it's lighter, obviously. And then in the darker areas, you get some of those more vibrant jewel tones. So just keep moving your heat tool around on your project. You can see when you tilt things in the light that they get nice and shiny and they melt towards your paper right on top of that nice juicy ink. And again, it's really nice to use a clothes peg or your tweezers just to give you a little bit of separation so you don't have to get your hands right in there. You don't want your embossing exercise to turn into a little game of hot potato. Okay, so that looks great. That is nice and melted. We're gonna set that off to the side and get working on our next swatch. So the next one, and again, I'm just gonna bring in another piece of copy paper to use as we catch the embossing powder in our next one, which is called Hydrangea. So Hydrangea, it's very light. There's very light purples and blues, creams. We may need to ink this one up twice. I'm not sure because I have not used it yet, but we're gonna see as we go through the process here. So I'm just gonna fold over my first sheet just to get some additional use out of this paper here. And going to grab the Gina K tape runner, get some tape runner on the back of our 2x2 square and on the back of our hexagon. And we've got a piece of scrap paper to adhere these to. So same process as the last time, except I am remembering to use my anti-static powder tool. So again, it's not crucial when you're doing swatches to do this because you're really getting some good coverage of your embossing powder. But, you know, it is nice just, you know, to get in the habit of it. I find that's one thing with embossing is you want to get in the habit of doing these things so that the next time you try them, you're not missing steps. And I can see there is a lot of embossing powder on my media mat, so I'm just bringing in a Swiffer cloth. Swiffer cloths are great to clean up your embossing powder. They really do catch a lot of it. You can take, you know, the regular Swiffer cloths and cut them because you don't need a full one all the time, but it really is helpful. So I just touched that with my hand again, so I'm going to hit it again with the anti-static powder tool just to make sure there's no oils or anything. So now I'm going to bring back the embossing ink. We're going to go direct to paper, smush that down right onto that 2x2 square. I'm starting a little bit down from the top so that I know I'll have time or space to write in what the ink is not the ink, sorry, what the embossing powder is that we're working with in my swatch book. So I'm going to bring in another half sheet of copy paper and let's take a look at this Hydrangea Again, it's super light, so I have a feeling we might need to emboss this twice, but let's see how this turns out here. Oh wow, look at those colors. Just awesome. So cool. I think WOW is really nailing it with some of the mixes that they're using in their embossing powder, and that is just so cool. Just turning it over and tapping off the excess. Okay, we'll set that off to the side, get this excess back into the container. And this is why I like to use copy paper, because once you put that fold in it, you get a nice crease. You can just easily fold it back into the container, and it really takes a lot of the mess and the fuss away of embossing. So I really like that. So I'm going to grab my clothes peg, get my heat tool nice and hot. Sorry for the noise, and let's get rolling on getting this melted. So just moving the heat tool around each of these pieces, getting this nice and melted onto our cardstock. And you can see that it's starting to get shiny, which is exactly what we want. And I think we got some pretty good coverage on this first go around. I don't think we're gonna need to do a second round here, which is great. I wasn't sure with the color mix within that Hydrangea embossing powder. I can just see a couple little spots that need to melt here. And I think we are good to go. Just one spot here in the middle. Awesome. Okay, so now I'm gonna set that aside and we're gonna work on the one that's already cooled. Get these pieces of scrap paper out of the way. And I'm gonna bring in my Swiffer cloth one more time just to get this cleaned up. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take off the hexagon. And again, I like to use that Gina K tape runner because it's really easy to take off. You saw how easy that was with my tweezers. So use some type of repositionable adhesive that you have. Do not use score tape if you want to take something off because it won't come off and you'll have a heck of a time. So now just peeling off the 2x2 square, and that comes off great. Get rid of that piece of scrap paper. So on the 2x2 square, I'm going to write WOW for the company. And this embossing powder is called Amalfi. Now, you can use your printer. Jennifer McGuire on her blog has free templates that you can customize to whatever you are swatching. And I have used those before. They're very handy, and it's very generous of her to do that. I do find I fight with my printer. This is a me specific thing. Fight with my printer for that sometimes. So I generally just write my swatches out myself. So this next one, again, we have WOW. And this is Hydrangea. And I really love writing my swatches again with that Sharpie Click Pen. It is one of the greatest, and I order them quite a bit, and I give them as gifts to people that I know who like good pens. So now we will get this second hexagon. We'll pop that off with the tweezers, and we're going to take off this Hydrangea one. And I'm actually just gonna peel this one back with my fingers. There we go. Awesome. So we're near the end here of this swatching exercise. I've got my score tape. This is the 1/4 inch score tape, and I'm just going to put 2 pieces on the back of each of these hexagons so that we can adhere the hexagon to the top of the container. So just get a couple pieces on here. And again, if you're swatching a bunch of material, do things in stages. So you can see here I'm doing this at the same time. I'm not switching to, you know, another step. I'm doing all the steps at the same stage for each of the colors that I'm swatching. So I know it's a little hard to tell with just 2, but let's say I was swatching 5. I would do the step of putting the score tape on all 5 before I moved on to adhering them, etc. It really does make a difference in your workflow when you batch all those things together. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we've got the Amalfi. I'm going to adhere that right to the top of the container. And we're going to do the same thing now for Hydrangea. All right. And there we go. So the last step here is to put the swatches into the swatch book. So we've got Amalfi first. There we go. These fit right into the 2x2 squares. I really like these 2x2 little page protectors for swatches. They work fantastic. So now you can see I've got all of my WOW embossing powders, the 4 new ones that I recently got, all swatched out, and I know exactly what they're going to look like on my projects. And if I'm just looking, if I don't have this book handy for whatever reason, I can just go to the little box that I have my embossing powders in, and I can also see really clearly right across the top what my powders will look like. So I hope this helped you to see, you know, how easy it is to swatch out embossing powders, and how it really does help when you're working on your projects to be able to see the result of the products that you're looking at, using. So it really does help to see, you know, matching things and things like that. So Kathy Zilski has a great video on her cardstock swatch ring, and I think she has a video, or maybe not a video, but tips on her ink swatches as well. And of course, Jennifer McGuire has amazing tips on how to use swatches and how they just improve some of the guesswork and workflow in your crafting. So I hope you were able to see the benefit of swatches here today, both on your containers and in a swatch book. If you would like to build one up on your own, please take a moment and subscribe to the Two Scrapbook Friends YouTube channel. We'd love to have you as a subscriber, and then you will be notified when we post new videos. If you did learn something in this video, please give it a thumbs up or leave any questions in the comments. We'll be happy to respond, and we will see you next time.